Hello everyone, my name is Jessie February. I'm a Women International Master from South Africa. Building your repertoire in chess can be rather daunting. I understand that because when building mine, okay, I'm brave to think that I have one, but it's still a work in progress. When preparing for a game, you may think that your opponent has all the resources available to them in order to prepare against you. That is if you have a database online. If you're like me, you like to surprise your opponent, take them out of opening preparation, and try to play something even if you're not feeling entirely comfortable in that line. Because then you are just forced to play chess. As an e4 player, I'm having to face things like the Caro-Kann, the French, the Sicilian, and a bunch of other openings where maybe I don't feel as prepared as many of my opponents are. I've picked a game from the World Olympiad, South Africa versus Colombia. Against the Sicilian, I've played open Sicilian, I've played with d4, c takes d4, queen takes d4, and even after something like knight c6, bringing the queen back to d3, briefly taking a look at that. Of course, it's important to broaden your repertoire as much as possible so that you can get familiar with different pawn structures and different middle game ideas, just in case your opponent forces you to transpose into a line you don't know. But I also am a huge advocate for perfecting one line and one opening. But if you consider yourself a beginner, a club player, an adult improver, someone wanting to improve their general game, I think that it's important to stick to one line and perfect that before moving on to something else. But here I decided to start after knight f3, d6, and here we have the open Sicilian. What I try to do when preparing against my opponents is try to take them out of preparation. In order to do so, you plan a very specific line. So things like systems and forcing lines, trading queens early, things like that are going to force your opponent to completely discard their opening preparation and focus on their general knowledge of the game. So after knight to f6, knight to c3 and a6. The general ideas are to play b5, bishop b7, attack on e4, and so on. And this is probably something that you've seen many times before. And here comes the move that I almost never play, which is h3. The idea behind h3 is to extend a little bit on the king side, playing g4 and eventually g5. So here my opponent plays h5, which is one of the main moves, and after bishop to g5, solidifying my bishop on this diagonal, anticipating something like e6 later on. And after provoking h5, it will be very difficult to get rid of this bishop on g5. And after knight to c6, knight to b3, and we're also going to see the importance of time management in this game. e6, allowing the pin, and now the bishop is actually doing something. Queen to d2, and I want a long castle. Because I've played a move like h3, and black has played a move like h5, I saw this as an opportunity to create an attack on the king side. Just because by playing g4, I'm already targeting one of black's kingside pawns. And after bishop to e7, f4, my king is not in any immediate danger, so at least I can afford to play a move like this, and there's no h6 to chase away my bishop. b5, anticipating my long castling, and I wouldn't have minded b4 as much, but here a3. The reason I decided to play a3 is just because after b4, chasing my knight away, the pawn on e4 is hanging. Bishop to b7, bishop to e2, allowing myself still the option of either castling long or castling short. And after queen to b6, no longer allowing me to short castle, I decided to long castle here. And now targeting the d6 pawn with both my queen and my rook, it's important to make sure that your moves do as much as possible. We often call these multi-purpose moves. The more things your moves do, the better it is for you. Castling has directed my rook onto a semi-open file that is very good, and the pressure on the pawn then becomes more. As well as the fact that I'm getting my king safe, away from open files and diagonals. And after black also decides to long castle here, I needed to put my pieces on better squares. So bishop f3 places the light squared bishop on its longest diagonal, inadvertently challenges the bishop on b7, which will probably happen a little bit later on, but it just improves the scope or potential scope of the bishop for later on attacks. King to b8 and queen to e2. My idea with queen e2 is to get the queen away from the file of the black rook. You never want to place your heavy pieces or piece of more value in line, even if it's in indirect line of a piece that is of less value. I just wanted to get the queen away from the line of the rook, and just in case of pawn breaks opening the file, my queen would have then been in danger. Queen to c7, which I was quite happy to see, and now I have the chance to double my rooks. But let's take a look at the time situation for a second. I have 55 minutes on the clock, and my opponent has 23 minutes on the clock. We're only 17 moves deep into this game, and we have to reach move 40 in order to get our extra 30 minutes. So we still have a number of moves to go before time control. This will make it really difficult for my opponent to keep composure in a middle game like this, meaning she has less than a minute per move. And to keep that in mind in a middle game, where you're having to spend quite a great deal of time trying to figure out what your next plan will be, having more time comes in handy. I have more than 30 minutes extra on the clock, which gives me a chance to spend more time in a position like this where it is very, very important. And she spent 3 minutes to play g6. Queen to f2. I wanted to control this diagonal. I thought it was quite important, not allowing the queen to come back to b6, and knight to g8. Offering a trade of bishops, I gladly accept here and play g4. And now we can see that h3 in the opening was not all that bad, allowing for the support of this pawn on g4. And after captures, and g5. I decided to push the pawn because along with pushing my pawn, I could lessen the amount of space that black has, also limiting the number of squares this knight can go to, so it can no longer reach d5 or g6. And after knight to e5, bishop e2, controlling the knight with the 2 square rule, knowing that this knight will never be able to go forward without my bishop attacking those squares, meaning c4, d3, f3, and g4 are all covered by my bishop, and that is the 2 square rule. Knight to c6 and knight d4, offering a trade of knights, which I felt was quite important in the middle game where all your pieces are developed. You then have to start comparing the activity of your pieces to that of your opponent. Is your knight stronger than your opponent's knight? Is your bishop stronger than your opponent's bishop? And if not, is there a way to neutralize them? Is there a way to get rid of your knight that is bad and trade it for their knight, which is good? And vice versa. Are they trying to trade your good pieces for their bad pieces? And can you disallow that? And another thing I realized that was really important in the middle game that saves a lot of time. Look for the piece that is doing the least and put it in a position, a square, even if it's not attacking anything, on a square that has more range, that can do more, that can support another piece, that can improve the way your pieces communicate, the harmony of your pieces. And since my knight on b3 wasn't doing a lot, I thought it would be the best idea to try and trade that knight. Queen takes, and now my queen is centralized, and now black is trying to do exactly that, try to improve the range of the pieces like the rook here. I just brought the queen back to e3 to try and attack the g5 pawn. And if black wanted to defend the pawn with f6, e6 is hanging. So after captures, and f6, I now have some outpost squares that I can reach, such as e6. Knight to d5. I wanted to get rid of black's bishop just because I felt like that bishop was quite strong. We are approaching an endgame. And we know that in endgames, bishops are often better because of the amount of range that they have on the board. Rook takes, rook to h2, and c3. Again, let's take a look at the time situation. I have 27 minutes on the clock and my opponent only has 55 seconds. We're on move 30, which means that there's still 10 moves to make without an extra 30 minutes, only 30 seconds increment per move. And this is increasingly obviously difficult for her then to think up a plan given how little time she has left on the clock. And this has benefited me tremendously. And we can now realize that even in a classical game, time is of utmost importance. And you have to know that time is also a piece on the board. Queen to c6, king to b1, rook to d7. And now it was important for me to keep composure, despite spending a lot of time on the moves that I had to make, such as 13 minutes on king b1. I had to make sure that there were no tactical motives left for black to make it easier for her to either exchange pieces or to get an attack on my king. And after queen to b6, rook to d4, completely blocking out the diagonal for her queen, limiting the number of squares that the queen has. And another thing to note, when you are up on time, or when you are putting pressure on your opponent, meaning you're the one who's attacking and limiting the amount of space your opponent has, try to avoid exchanges at all costs. Even if that means that you are moving your pieces to a slightly weaker square, if it can benefit you in the long run, that it gives your opponent more to think about and more pieces to worry about and more to calculate, that's better. If there are fewer pieces on the board, it makes it easier for them to gain more space for their pieces, as well as when there are few pieces on the board, perhaps it is also more easy to play faster. King c7, bishop to f3, and knight takes. And now that the minor pieces are off, I'm able to take on d6. But after queen to c5, I have this beautiful queen g3 move. And perhaps in this position, you can actually pause the video. I have 3 minutes with 3 moves to go, and she has 1 minute. White to move. You can pause the video, try to figure out what I played here. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I played. Queen to g1. And the threat is queen to b6. Again, when you are the one attacking or putting pressure on your opponent, when you have more time on the clock, avoid exchanges. And this is where I utilized that idea and, of course, just wanted to find a way to checkmate. King to c8, queen b6, and now I'm threatening checkmate on d8. And after queen check, king a1, unfortunately, there is no way to stop checkmate or losing some pieces. So that is a great way to talk about how to get your opponent out of preparation, as well as dealing with having more time on the clock, the importance of time control. This can happen in blitz, rapid, or classical. I hope this could help you in your general improvement of your game. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.